I had always hated the feeling of being watched, like someone was lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the right moment to strike. But that night, as I stepped out of the bar, the unsettling sense of familiarity washed over me in a way I couldn't ignore. I brushed past a figure in the dim light of the street, a barely noticeable nudge, but when I glanced up, my heart froze. His eyes were locked onto mine, like time itself had stopped. There was no mistaking it. Him. My ex. The last person I ever wanted to see again, yet there he was, standing mere inches away, his presence like a weight I couldn't shake off. The world blurred around us as we shared that brief, electric moment. I knew this wasn't the first time we'd run into each other in the past month. No, it was the third. Every time, it felt like fate was pulling us together. Except it wasn't fate. It was something darker, something deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me, showing up at just the wrong moments, in places he shouldn't be. This time, it felt different though. My chest tightened, my breath quickened, and I struggled to keep my calm. He was too close. I wanted to look away, pretend nothing happened, but something about his stare made me feel like I couldn't. He took a step forward, his voice low but confident. "We should talk. I just need to explain. Please." The words hit me like a slap, the weight of them too familiar. "You're not welcome in my life anymore," I replied, my voice shaking with a blend of fear and anger. I couldn't show him weakness. Not again. I turned to walk away, but something inside me snapped. The last thing I needed was to be caught up in his drama, yet I couldn't ignore that sinking feeling in my gut. This wasn't a coincidence. Not anymore. Later, as I sat in the comfort of my fiancé's apartment, I couldn't get the image of his face out of my mind. I showed him the message my ex had sent me. "Let's meet. We have unfinished business." The words felt like poison on my tongue, and I was frozen in indecision. I couldn't just let it go, but I didn't know how to deal with it either. "What should I do?" I asked, unsure of my next move. My fiancé's expression darkened as he read the message. His hand curled into a fist. "He's not going to get away with this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. But the words were a promise, a silent vow to protect me, even if I didn't yet understand how deep this would go. I still remember the first time I met him like it was yesterday. I was 22, young, naive, and endlessly hopeful about love. It was at a mutual friend's housewarming party, a humid summer evening filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of indie music in the background. I wasn't even planning on staying long, but then I saw him across the room, his smile charming but slightly mischievous. He caught me glancing and walked straight over, confident in a way that felt magnetic. "Mind if I steal your attention for a bit?" he had asked, flashing that disarming grin. I laughed. It felt like such a line, but it worked. Within moments, we were lost in conversation. He was clever, funny, and knew how to make me feel like I was the most important person in the room. The way he looked at me made my cheeks flush. For the first time in a while, I felt seen. By the end of the night, I was hooked. The whirlwind romance that followed felt like something out of a novel. Flowers. Just because. Late-night drives with no destination. And endless conversations about our dreams and fears. He made me feel alive, like I was living in Technicolor after years of monotony. I fell hard and fast. But hindsight is cruel. Looking back, there were signs even in those early days. I was too enamored to notice how his charm often slipped into possessiveness. At first, it seemed like little things, questions about where I was going, who I was with, and why I didn't answer my phone right away. I thought it was sweet that he cared so much. When he wrapped me in his arms and said, "I just want to keep you safe," I felt lucky. How foolish I was to confuse control with love. The first real fight came just a few months in. I had met up with some friends for coffee, one of whom happened to be an old male classmate. Innocent, right? Not to him. When I mentioned it later in passing, his entire demeanor changed. His smile vanished, replaced by something hard and unfamiliar. "Why didn't you tell me beforehand?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. I was confused. "It was just coffee, nothing more," I explained, laughing nervously, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. Do you think I'm stupid?" His eyes darkened as he crossed his arms. "Guys don't just want to be friends. You're blind if you believe that." The conversation spiraled into an argument that left me shaken. I cried, and he eventually apologized, pulling me close and whispering, "I just love you too much. I can't stand the idea of losing you." I wanted to believe him. Maybe love was supposed to feel that intense, that overwhelming. So I forgave him, again and again. But his apologies became a pattern, a toxic cycle disguised as passion. Over time, his jealousy evolved into something far more insidious. He'd check my phone when I wasn't looking, questioning every text message, every social media post. I started changing how I dressed and who I talked to, all in an attempt to keep the peace. If a guy so much as smiled at me in passing, I'd brace myself for the fallout. I remember one night vividly. We had gone to a small concert at a downtown venue, one of our favorite things to do together. The band was amazing, the crowd alive with energy. I was laughing, singing along, and for a moment, I felt free. But then someone from the crowd, just a random stranger, complimented my dress as I passed by. I didn't even respond, but it was enough to set him off. The drive home was tense. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel, and I sat in silence, heart pounding, waiting for the storm to break. "You love the attention, don't you?" He finally spat out, voice thick with venom. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "It's not like that," I whispered, tears already burning my eyes. But no matter what I said, he didn't believe me. In his mind, I was guilty of a crime I hadn't committed. That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering how something so beautiful could become so broken. And yet, I stayed. Why? Because when things were good, they were intoxicatingly good. He had a way of making me feel like I was his entire world, until he didn't. I clung to the memories of our laughter, the way he'd brush a strand of hair behind my ear, the nights we stayed up until dawn, dreaming of a future together. I convinced myself that those moments were worth the pain. But love shouldn't feel like a battlefield. It shouldn't make you question your worth or feel like you're walking on eggshells every day. Deep down, I knew that. But breaking free felt impossible when he had woven himself so deeply into every part of my life. The unraveling of us was slow and painful. Each argument chipped away at the foundation of who I was. I started losing sight of the person I used to be, the vibrant, carefree girl who laughed easily and loved without fear. In her place was someone anxious and uncertain, doubting her every move. And yet, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I stayed far longer than I should have. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was the fear of what my life would look like without him. I took a deep breath, staring down at my hands as I sat across from him. The weight of what I was about to say made my chest feel heavy, like a boulder pressing down on my lungs. But I had to let it out. He deserved to know everything. "You know," I began, my voice soft but steady. "There was a moment, just one defining moment, when I realized who he really was. The moment I knew I had to leave before I lost myself completely." My fiancé nodded, silent but attentive, his eyes locked on mine, encouraging me to continue. "It was a Friday night. I remember it clearly because I was supposed to have a girls' night with my best friend, Claire. We'd been planning it for weeks. Pizza, bad rom-coms, and a bottle of wine. Just a break from everything. I told him about it in advance, thinking it wouldn't be a big deal. But when I left my apartment that evening, there he was, waiting in his car at the curb. The memory sent a cold shiver down my spine. I remember freezing in place, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind scrambled for an innocent explanation. Maybe he was just in the area? Maybe it was a coincidence. But when I walked toward Claire's apartment, he started driving slowly alongside me, matching my pace. I'll never forget that hollow feeling in my stomach, the realization that this wasn't an accident. "What did he say?" my fiancé asked, his voice tight with anger on my behalf. I swallowed hard. He didn't say anything at first. He just rolled down the window and stared at me with that look, like he was daring me to pretend everything was fine. I tried to ignore him, kept walking, but then he pulled over and got out of the car. I remember the sound of his footsteps behind me, sharp, purposeful. He caught up to me and grabbed my wrist. I paused, blinking back the rush of emotions. His grip was so tight it hurt, and in that moment, I wasn't just scared. I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd let it get this far. He started asking where I was going, who I was meeting. He kept saying he had a right to know because he loved me. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced myself to keep going. I told him to let me go, that I needed space, but he wouldn't. Instead, he followed me all the way to Claire's building. When I finally stepped inside and locked the door behind me, I could still feel his presence like a shadow on my skin. I watched from the window as he stood outside for nearly an hour, just staring up at the building. My fiancé's jaw clenched. "That's insane," he muttered. I nodded slowly. It was, but it didn't end there. That night, he blew up my phone with calls and texts. At first, he was apologetic, saying he didn't mean to scare me. But when I didn't respond, his tone changed. The messages became darker, threatening, manipulative. He told me I was being cruel, that I was breaking his heart. He said I'd regret it if I kept shutting him out. I took another shaky breath. That night, Claire made me promise I'd end things for good. She told me, "This isn't love, it's obsession." And deep down, I knew she was right. I'd been making excuses for him for so long, but this was something I couldn't ignore. I looked down at my hands, twisting the ring on my finger as I spoke. The next day, I asked him to meet me in a public place, somewhere safe, where he couldn't cause a scene. I told him it was over. I expected him to argue, to yell, but instead, he just stared at me. And then, with this eerie calm, he said, "You'll be back. You'll see. You're nothing without me." My voice cracked as I remembered that moment. That was the scariest part, the way he made it sound like a fact, not a threat, like he truly believed I couldn't exist without him. And for a second, I almost believed it too. My fiancé reached across the table, taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, steady, a lifeline pulling me back to the present. "But you didn't go back," he said quietly. I smiled weakly. "No, I didn't. I moved out of our shared apartment the same week. I blocked his number, changed my daily routines, even took a new route to work just to avoid him. I thought it would be enough. I thought that leaving would be the end of it. But it wasn't," he whispered, already knowing the answer. I shook my head. No, it wasn't. He didn't let go, and that's when I realized he never really loved me. He loved the control, and when he lost that, he lost everything. A long silence settled between us, the weight of my story hanging in the air. For so long, I had carried that fear alone. But now, with him sitting there, listening without judgment, I felt lighter, like I was finally reclaiming my voice, piece by piece. "I'm not afraid of him anymore," I said softly, more to myself than to him. My fiancé squeezed my hands tighter, his eyes fierce but gentle. "You're not alone anymore, and if he ever tries to hurt you again, he'll have to go through me first." In that moment, I knew this was the love I deserved. Not fear disguised as passion, not control masquerading as care, but real, steady, unwavering love. I stared at my phone, the glowing screen feeling heavier than it should. His message was short, just a few words. "We need to talk, please, just one last time." My stomach twisted into knots. I had spent years trying to put the past behind me, to move on and rebuild my life, but there he was again, like a shadow refusing to let go. It wasn't just the message that haunted me, it was the timing. 3 chance encounters in 1 month. Once at the grocery store, then at a cafe, and finally outside that bar. It felt deliberate, like he'd orchestrated these moments, pulling invisible strings to re-enter my life. I hesitated for a moment before showing the message to my fiancé. He read it silently, his brow furrowed as the tension in his jaw tightened. "What the hell does he want now?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with protective anger. I shook my head. "I don't know. That's what scares me." He placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "You don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with." "I know," I whispered, running my fingers over the edge of the phone. "But what if it's something serious? What if he—" My voice faltered, the words catching in my throat. I didn't even know what I was afraid of. Him? Myself? The memories? For years after we broke up, he disappeared completely. No texts, no calls, no accidental run-ins. He was just gone. I remember the relief that came with his absence, the gradual return to normalcy, like a weight had been lifted. But I also remember the unanswered questions that lingered in the background. Where did he go? What happened to him after I left? And now he was back, as if time had folded in on itself. My fiancé's hand slid down to mine, squeezing gently. Look, I'll be honest, I don't like this. I don't like him anywhere near you, but maybe you should go and see what he wants. I stared at him, shocked. You want me to meet him? He nodded, though I could see the conflict in his eyes. I'm not saying I trust him, I don't. But if he's showing up like this, if he's reaching out, we need to know why. The last thing I want is for you to live in fear, wondering what his next move is. I'd rather you face him on your terms, not his. I felt a lump in my throat. What if it's a trap? What if he's dangerous? Then I'll be there, close enough to make sure you're safe, he said firmly. You won't be alone. His certainty felt like an anchor in the storm of doubt swirling inside me. I wasn't used to this kind of partnership, this steady, unwavering support. When I was with my ex, love had felt like a performance, a constant test where failure meant punishment. But with my fiancé, it felt like home. Okay, I murmured, though my chest felt tight. But just one meeting, and only in public. He nodded. Absolutely. Somewhere crowded, somewhere safe. The plan settled between us, a fragile thread tying the chaos into something manageable. I sent a short, cautious reply. Fine. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., the cafe by the plaza. The response came almost instantly. Thank you. You don't know how much this means to me. I stared at the message, my heart hammering against my ribs. It felt surreal, like I was willingly walking back into a nightmare. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every painful memory, every fight, every moment of fear. But as the first rays of dawn slipped through the curtains, I made a decision. I wasn't the same person I was back then. I wasn't weak or helpless anymore, and whatever he wanted, I wouldn't let him control me again. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my heart in my throat as I scanned the crowd. Families with strollers, friends laughing over lattes, people typing away on laptops. It all felt so normal, and yet I felt like I was stepping into a battlefield. And then I saw him. He was sitting at a table by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. He looked different, thinner, older, like the years had weighed on him in ways I couldn't imagine. But his eyes, they were the same. That same intensity, that same storm. When he saw me, he stood up and offered a hesitant smile. Thank you for coming. I didn't return the smile. Instead, I sat down, keeping a cautious distance. Why now? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Why after all this time? He exhaled slowly, as if the question itself was a burden. I've been through a lot, he began. After you left, I didn't handle it well. That's an understatement, I muttered, crossing my arms. His face fell. I'm not here to make excuses. I know I hurt you. I know I scared you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He looked away for a moment, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. I went to therapy after everything happened, tried to fix myself, but I don't think I ever really could. I watched him carefully, searching for signs of manipulation. Was this genuine, or just another act? He continued, his voice quieter. I lost everything after you left. My job, my friends, my sense of purpose. I was so angry, at you, at myself, at the world. I was reckless. And then, one day, I woke up and realized I didn't want to live like that anymore. I blinked, unsure of what to say. So, why contact me now? I asked again. He hesitated, then finally admitted, because I never got closure, and I needed to know if you were okay, if you ever forgave me. My heart softened, just for a moment, but I kept my guard up. I don't owe you forgiveness. I said firmly. You broke me in ways you can't even begin to understand. I rebuilt myself from the ground up, and I'm happy now, without you. He nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. I know, and I'm glad. He wiped his face quickly, trying to compose himself. I'm leaving town soon. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. A part of me wanted to believe him, to accept this as some kind of bittersweet ending. But another part of me, the smarter part, knew better than to trust too easily. I hope you mean that, I said quietly. Because if you come near me again, I won't hesitate to protect myself. He gave a small, sad smile. You don't have to worry about me anymore. As I stood up to leave, I caught a glimpse of my fiancé waiting across the street, his watchful eyes tracking my every move. And for the first time in years, I felt safe, truly safe. I walked out of that cafe with my head held high, knowing that whatever happened next, I was no longer the girl who lived in fear. I was stronger, and I was free. As soon as I stepped out of the cafe, the cool breeze hit me, but it didn't calm the storm brewing inside. I spotted my fiancé's car parked across the street, and the moment our eyes met, I felt a wave of reassurance wash over me. He opened the passenger door, waiting for me to slip inside. Are you okay? He asked as soon as I closed the door. His voice was calm, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his concern. I nodded slowly, though the knot in my stomach said otherwise. I'm fine, I think. It wasn't what I expected. He shifted into drive and pulled onto the road, his eyes flicking to me every few seconds as if checking to make sure I was really there. What did he say? I exhaled shakily. He apologized, said he was trying to move on, that he's leaving town, but you don't believe him. I shook my head, biting my lip. No, I don't. Not completely. There's something about the way he looked at me. It felt like he was holding something back. My fiancé's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. I don't like this. None of it. I don't care what he said. He doesn't just get to show up in your life again and expect forgiveness or closure. Not after everything he put you through. I know, I whispered, staring out the window as the familiar streets blurred past. But part of me, I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to believe it's over. He reached over and gently took my hand, his thumb brushing soothing circles over my skin. It is over. Whatever happens, we'll get through it. Together. I wanted to believe him, but as we pulled into the driveway and I saw the soft glow of the porch light, a strange unease settled in my chest. Something felt off. I tried to shake it off as paranoia left over from seeing my ex, but it clung to me like a second skin. We stepped inside, and the familiar comfort of home should have been a relief. Instead, the silence felt too loud, too heavy. Do you want some tea? My fiancé asked, setting his keys down on the counter. Sure, I replied, though my voice sounded distant, like it didn't quite belong to me. He headed toward the kitchen, and I wandered into the living room, rubbing my arms as if I could chase away the lingering chill. I paused in front of the coffee table, frowning. The magazines I had stacked neatly this morning were scattered haphazardly. A chill shot down my spine. Did you move these? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My fiancé popped his head around the corner. What? I pointed to the mess. The magazines, they're out of place. He frowned and walked over, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker. No, I didn't touch them. I swallowed hard, my heart beginning to race. I glanced around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every misplaced object. The blanket on the couch was bunched up instead of folded. One of the picture frames was slightly askew. My fiancé noticed it too. His eyes scanned the room, sharp and focused. Stay here, he said, his voice low and serious. He disappeared into the hallway, checking the other rooms while I stayed rooted to the spot. Every muscle in my body tensed like a coiled spring. I listened intently, my breath shallow, waiting for some sign, any sign, that everything was okay. A minute later, he returned, his face pale. The back door. He paused, running a hand through his hair. It was unlocked. My stomach dropped. But we locked it before we left. I remember double-checking it. He nodded grimly. I know. My pulse pounded in my ears as the realization sank in. Someone had been here. The room felt colder, the walls closing in around me. My fiancé grabbed his phone and dialed the police, his voice steady but urgent as he explained the situation. We think someone broke in. No, nothing's missing. Please send someone. He ended the call and pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me. I could feel the tension in his body, his protective instinct burning beneath the surface. It's going to be okay, he murmured into my hair, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. We sat together on the couch, waiting for what felt like an eternity until the red and blue lights flashed outside. The officers arrived, professional but kind, combing through the house for any signs of forced entry. But there was nothing. No broken locks, no smashed windows. Just that unlocked door, as if someone had slipped in and out without a trace. One of the officers, a woman with a calm, steady presence, sat down with us after the search. It doesn't look like anything was taken, and we didn't find any signs of damage. Are you sure you didn't accidentally leave the door unlocked? No, I said firmly. I'm certain we locked it. She nodded slowly, jotting down notes. Do you have any reason to believe someone would want to intimidate or scare you? I hesitated for only a moment before answering. Yes, my ex-boyfriend. I saw him today for the first time in years. He's been showing up lately. It's probably nothing, but... The officer exchanged a glance with her partner. We'll file a report. If anything else happens, anything at all, call us immediately. After they left, the house felt emptier than ever. The shadows seemed longer, darker, like they were hiding something just out of reach. I curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow to my chest, while my fiancé double-checked every lock and window. When he finally sat beside me, he looked exhausted but determined. I don't care what the police say, he muttered. I know it was him. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my breathing. I know, I whispered. It felt like him. The way everything was touched, but not taken. It's exactly how he was back then, always needing to leave his mark without being caught. My fiancé pulled me closer, his arms a shield against the fear threatening to swallow me whole. We'll get through this, he said again, more fiercely this time. No matter what it takes. For a moment, I let myself believe him. But deep down, a quiet voice whispered that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but we both knew we needed a break, a chance to breathe, to shake off the suffocating weight of what had happened. After the police left that night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every shift of the shadows felt like a threat. I was trapped in a constant state of fear, unable to relax in the one place I should have felt safe. My fiancé was the one who suggested it. We need to get away, just for a while, somewhere peaceful, somewhere no one can find us. I hesitated at first. But what if... He cut me off, gently taking my hand. We can't live like this. You can't live like this. Let's go somewhere, just the two of us. We'll turn off our phones, disconnect, and just be, even if it's only for a week. The exhaustion in his eyes mirrored my own. He wasn't just doing this for me, he needed it too. And so, I agreed. We booked a last-minute flight to a quiet coastal town, white sands, turquoise water, and small, cozy cottages that felt a world away from the chaos we'd left behind. The first morning there, I woke up to the sound of the waves and the warmth of his arms around me, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. We spent our days walking along the beach, watching the sun melt into the horizon, and sharing quiet conversations under the stars. There were moments when I almost forgot what we had run from, moments when I felt like myself again. But even in paradise, the memories lingered like shadows at the edge of my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that unlocked door, felt the phantom chill of someone's presence in our home. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that no amount of distance could keep the past from catching up to us. One night, as we sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, my fiancé tilted his head toward me. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? I nodded, staring out at the dark ocean. It's like I'm waiting for something to happen. Like if I let my guard down, it'll all come crashing back. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle but grounding. I get it, but you're not alone in this. You don't have to fight this battle by yourself anymore. I leaned into him, letting the warmth of his embrace seep into my bones. I wanted to believe him so badly, to believe that this chapter of my life could finally end. By the time our week was up, I felt lighter. Not completely healed, but a little more whole. As we boarded the plane back home, I told myself that I was ready to face whatever came next. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I felt the weight return. The porch light was off, and the house was cloaked in shadows. I shook off the unease as jet lag, but as we stepped inside, that feeling of dread surged up like a tidal wave. I froze in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. The house was destroyed. Every drawer had been pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. Our couch cushions had been ripped apart, stuffing spilling out like the remains of some gutted beast. The picture frames on the walls were shattered, their glass shards glinting ominously in the dim light. My fiancé's face went pale as he stepped in front of me protectively. "Stay here," he said, though his voice was tight with rage. But I couldn't stay still. I took a shaky step forward, my eyes darting around the room, trying to process the chaos. That's when I saw it, the note. It was sitting on the coffee table, stark against the destruction around it. A single piece of paper with bold, jagged handwriting. "You will be mine. No one else can have you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the blood drain from my face. My fiancé snatched the note before I could reach for it, crumpling it in his fist as if trying to erase its existence. This is sick," he growled, pacing back and forth. He broke in again. He was here. I sank onto the edge of the couch, the torn fabric rough against my skin. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, cloying, as if the walls were closing in. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to calm the whirlwind of fear and nausea spiraling inside me. "He's not going to stop," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He's never going to stop." My fiancé knelt in front of me, gripping my hands tightly. "Listen to me," he said, his eyes burning with determination. "We are not going to let him win. We'll call the police again. We'll install cameras, alarms, whatever it takes. He doesn't get to control you anymore." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel the same resolve he did. But all I felt was helpless. No matter how many locks we installed or precautions we took, it felt like he would always find a way. He was always one step ahead, always watching, waiting. The police arrived within the hour, but just like before, there were no fingerprints, no obvious signs of forced entry. The officer, the same one who had spoken to us last time, looked at me with sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We'll do everything we can, but there's only so much we can do without solid evidence." Her words felt like a death sentence. After they left, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. We spent the next few hours cleaning up the mess, sweeping up glass, and putting things back where they belonged. But no matter how much we tried to restore order, the house still felt tainted. Violated. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I had spent years running, hiding, trying to rebuild myself only for him to tear it all down again. And I was tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of letting him control my life. Something inside me hardened. If he wanted a fight, he was about to get one. As the dawn light filtered through the curtains, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cold cup of tea. I hadn't slept. Neither of us had. My fiancé sat across from me, his fingers drumming softly on the wooden surface, his expression distant but focused. I could tell his mind was racing, trying to come up with a solution. I had run out of ideas, out of strength. Finally, he broke the silence. "We can't keep waiting for the next attack," he said, his voice steady but firm. "We can't live like this." I nodded slowly. "But what can we do? The police already said they can't help unless they have solid proof. And all we have is Fear. He leaned forward, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. Then we get proof. I blinked, confused. What do you mean? He exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself for what he was about to say. We need him to confess, to slip up. If we can get him to admit what he's done, even part of it, we'll have something solid, enough for the police to take action. A chill ran down my spine as I realized where he was going with this. You want me to meet him again? Not alone, he said quickly. I'll be nearby, watching the whole time, and we'll record everything. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. I'll set it up so that every word he says is caught on audio. If we can get him to admit he broke in, that he's been following you, it'll be over. He won't be able to deny it anymore. The idea sent a wave of anxiety crashing over me. The thought of sitting face to face with my ex again, knowing everything he'd done, made my stomach churn. But at the same time, it was a plan, a way to finally take control, to stop being the victim. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. What if he doesn't take the bait? What if he doesn't show? My fiancé's jaw tightened. He will. Men like him, they need to feel in control. He's not going to pass up the chance to see you again, to try to manipulate you one last time. And when he does, we'll be ready. I hesitated, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear and determination. But when I looked at him, my fiancé, the one person who had stood by me through all of this, I felt a spark of courage I hadn't felt in a long time. Okay, I whispered. Let's do it. We sent the message that afternoon. Simple, direct. We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow at noon, the same cafe. The response came within minutes. I'll be there. My stomach twisted at the sight of his words. He sounded so calm, so sure of himself, but this time he wasn't the one in control. That night, we tested the recording app several times to make sure everything worked. My fiancé showed me how to activate it with a quick tap on the screen. The second you sit down, turn this on, he said, placing the phone in my hand. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there. I nodded, clutching the phone tightly as if it were a lifeline. I know. The next day felt surreal. The cafe was quiet, only a few early lunchgoers scattered around. The sun poured in through the large windows, casting soft golden light across the tables, but it did little to ease the weight pressing down on my chest. I sat at the same table as before, my heart pounding in my ears. My fiancé was nearby, sitting at a table by the door, pretending to scroll through his phone. I knew he was watching every move, listening for any sign of danger. And then my ex walked in. He spotted me immediately and smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made my skin crawl. He approached the table and sat down without hesitation, folding his hands in front of him like this was just another casual conversation. You came, he said, as if he were genuinely surprised. I forced myself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at me to run. I wanted answers, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm tired of living in fear. His expression shifted slightly. Amusement? Regret? I couldn't tell. You don't have to be afraid of me. I'd never hurt you. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Then why? Why did you break into our house? Why leave that note? What do you want from me? His smile faltered for the briefest moment, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. You think I broke in? He asked, his tone incredulous but not quite convincing. Come on, that's not me. Then who was it? I shot back. Who else would leave a message like that? His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. He stopped himself, glancing around nervously. Admit it, I pressed, my voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. You've been following me, showing up where I am, watching me. You can't lie anymore. I know it's you. For a moment, the mask slipped. The calm, collected persona cracked, and I saw the man I'd known during those last terrible months of our relationship, the man who believed he owned me. You don't understand, he said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. I had no choice. You left me. You ruined everything. I needed to remind you of what we had. to make you see that you belong with me." His words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "What you did wasn't love. It was control, and I'll never be yours again." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything else, my fiancé stood up and approached the table. His sudden presence seemed to jolt my ex like a shockwave. "That's enough," my fiancé said coldly, stepping between us. "You're done." My ex's face twisted with anger, but he didn't move. He knew he was caught. "You recorded this, didn't you?" he spat, eyes darting toward my phone. I stood up slowly, slipping the phone into my pocket. "Yes, and now the police will know the truth." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You think this will stop me?" "It already has," my fiancé said, his voice low but steady. My ex stared at us for a long moment before finally standing. For the first time, I saw something new in his eyes: fear. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe. My knees felt weak, and my fiancé caught me as I stumbled slightly. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." Tears welled up in my eyes, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finally taking back my life. We left the cafe together, hand in hand, ready to bring the recording to the police. This time, he wouldn't get away. The moment we stepped into the police station with the recording, everything began to feel more real. The weight of it all, the fear, the anger, the constant paranoia, pressed down on me as we handed over the audio file. I watched the officer's face as she listened to it, her expression shifting from professional detachment to something far more serious. "This?" She paused, taking a deep breath. "This is exactly what we needed. You did the right thing bringing this in." Her words sent a wave of relief through me, but the fear still lingered, coiled tight in my chest like a spring. "Will it be enough?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The officer nodded. "Yes, we have everything we need now. A confession of stalking, implied threats, and a clear history of harassment. We'll move fast." For the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My fiancé squeezed my hand gently, a small gesture that said we're almost there. Within the next few hours, things moved quickly. The police filed an emergency restraining order and issued an arrest warrant. I thought I'd feel a sense of triumph, but all I felt was exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness from carrying this burden for so long. When the call finally came that evening, we were sitting in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it. The officer's voice was calm, steady. "We have him in custody. He was arrested at his apartment without incident. He's being charged with stalking, threats, and harassment." The words washed over me, and for the first time they felt real. He's gone. I felt my body relax, the tension melting away as if I'd been holding it together with sheer willpower. I looked over at my fiancé, tears brimming in my eyes. "It's over." He reached out, cupping my face in his hands. "Yes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's really over." The next few weeks passed in a blur. The trial moved swiftly. Our evidence was damning, and his defense was weak at best. He pleaded guilty, trying to reduce his sentence, but the judge didn't waver. The weight of his actions, the fear he'd inflicted, the violation of our home, couldn't be ignored. When the sentence was handed down, several years in prison for stalking, harassment, and making credible threats, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in it, no celebration, just relief and closure. He was gone, and I was finally free. After the sentencing, life began to shift back to something normal. No more checking over my shoulder, no more waking up in the middle of the night at the slightest sound. The shadows that had haunted me began to fade. But there was one moment I'll never forget. The morning I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside our window, sunlight streaming in, and the comforting warmth of my fiancé's arm draped over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, my first thought wasn't fear. It was peace. A few months later, we stood together on a quiet beach at sunset, the waves crashing gently at our feet. My dress fluttered in the breeze as I held his hand, my heart brimming with love and gratitude. We'd chosen an intimate ceremony, just us, a few close friends, and the endless sky. As he slid the ring onto my finger, I felt tears sting my eyes, not tears of pain or fear, but of joy, pure, unfiltered joy. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you, always," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I promise to do the same," I whispered, my voice breaking as I smiled through the tears. When we kissed, it felt like sealing the final chapter of a painful story and stepping into something new, something beautiful. Life after that day was everything I dreamed of and more. We built a life filled with laughter, love, and quiet moments of peace. Weekend getaways, late-night movie marathons, and morning coffee on the porch became our normal. And for the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, he wrapped his arm around me and whispered, "You're the bravest person I know." I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. I wasn't brave alone. I had you. The past still lingered in the corners of my memory, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it became a reminder of how far I'd come, how far we'd come. I'd found my strength again, rebuilt my life from the ashes of something broken. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was free. And as I looked at the man I loved, the man who had fought by my side through every battle, I knew that this was my happily ever after. A life I had fought for and finally earned.